Hi, this is Tim of the 1916 Company. Welcome and thanks for logging on. Today we have what is best described as a no comparison test. $10,000 watch versus $180,000 watch. Both calendar chronographs versus starts now. We may as well start with the watch that is less familiar to our viewers. When this came out in 2021, all of us had pretty much the same reaction. Really? Because everyone understood immediately the connection to Patek Philippe's new for 2018 5270p salmon dial platinum perpetual calendar. And yes, there is a huge price delta here, but in terms of wrist presence and day-to-day functionality, they're more similar than you think. Now, let's just be clear. The Patek is a better watch in almost every way, but I think you're going to be surprised by how many blows the Breitling manages to land. So let's start with the Breitling again. New for 2021, this arrived as Breitling was beginning to build out its Premier collection. The Premiers are inspired by the Breitling Premiers of the middle of the 20th century, and this one goes one step further. It is the Premier B25 Datora. Datora, a name at Breitling during the 1940s for a chronograph that has a triple calendar and a moon phase, and this watch has all of that. Now in steel, it's 42 millimeters in diameter, it's 15.7 millimeters thick, and then from lug tip to lug tip, 49.5 millimeters, which is almost exactly the same lug-to-lug as the Patek, which is 49.6. The strap here is very attractive. You can only tell the difference in quality when you put them side by side, where it's clear that the Patek uses more symmetrical scales, and while they're both large rectangular scale, this is symmetrical scale, which is large rectangular symmetrical scale, all the qualities that make the most expensive and finest cut of the hide. This follows close behind, but you can see towards the end of the strap, the scales are not quite as symmetrical. It's a small distinction. What the Breitling does have going for it, though, is a much thicker and bolstered strap. They're both calfskin on the bottom. The Patek has the pull tab spring bars, but the Breitling has a much thicker strap, and it feels more substantial on the wrist and in the hand. Now, in terms of the movement here, you've got a Concepto C2000, which is Concepto's version of the Valjoux 7750, automatic winding, 48-hour power reserve, 4 Hz beat rate, COSC chronometer certified. It has a quick set system for the moon phase, the date, and the month. And you can see that it is a column wheel conversion of the 7750, so you get a much more positive tactile experience than with the cam actuated version of a 7750. 5-position adjusted, you can see it is a chronometer. The rotor reveals as much. We have a twin trigger release, single fold deployant clasp. So let's talk about some of the advantages that the Breitling has, and let's do a wrist shot. On the wrist, they are surprisingly similar. It's a thick watch, definitely thicker than the Patek, but not oppressively so. And you can see a lot of the design elements that evoke the mid-20th century. Now, my wrist is 16 centimeters circumference, just for reference, but we've got those little 3-minute marks on the chronograph minutes counter. That's how long-distance calls were billed back in the day. You can see the tachymeter is on the dial. It is on the Patek as well. That's a pre-1960 feature. After that, most tachymeters were on bezels. A dramatically vaulted and cambered sapphire to give you the impression of a 1940s plexiglass, and then this lovely machine-age Art Deco set of strakes on the side. Plus, we have these lovely wraparound bevels on the lugs and vintage-inspired rectangular chronograph pushers. So we've got all that going on. I do want to let you see real quick. We talked about these being salmon dials, but you can see that the Patek has more of an undertone of rose, and it is truly sort of a salmon coloration, whereas this is more orange. When you get them side by side, it becomes more apparent. You can also see that these are white gold numerals, indices, and hands that have been blackened, whereas these are all rhodium-plated steel. So let's talk about the advantages with the B25 Datora. The big one, price. This watch retails for $14,500, pre-owned, as you see it right here, box and papers, all that stuff, $10,000. It's good value for what you get. And, of course, the Patek, not available as a salmon dial anymore, but the current green dial model, which is technically identical and dimensionally identical, retails for $219,760, and the salmon dial you just saw is pre-owned between $175,000 and $180,000. So 10 grand, it is 1/18th of the Patek in price. Another advantage, and this is kind of a big one, if you do want to wear this as your only watch or your regular watch, luminescence. The Patek doesn't have it. Also, a feature the Patek does not have, 100-meter water resistance. Put it on a different strap. This is a swimmable watch. Automatic winding, especially with a calendar. It's nice to have the automatic winding system to keep everything topped off. Now, of course, the Patek is a Perpetual. This is a simple calendar, so this will need to be reset 5 times a year, but the hope is that it won't have to be reset more than that because the rotor winding will keep it topped up. And of course, this is a certified chronometer. While Patek makes claims about accuracy, Breitling does submit this movement to the COSC's test, and so third-party certification is something I consider particularly impressive. It's something that Patek has done on very high-end watches, think the 10-day tourbillon, for example, in the last quarter century, but it's not something Patek has done in recent years. So I think the COSC carries particular weight here, even though Patek claims that its watch is even more accurate. This has been vetted in a third-party fashion. There is a quick set system here that I value. Every calendar indication on the Patek has to be set with pusher adjusters, which require a tool. It can be cumbersome and difficult. It risks scratching the case. Here you have a quick set system that drives the date as well as the month. Then when you turn it in the other direction, it drives the moon phase. Both watches do have a 5-year warranty and hacking seconds, so just to be clear on that count, they're equal on that basis. But they're not equal on this basis. Here we have a twin trigger release clasp, so you press these 2 triggers and it pops open, and that's a great thing because this watch is heavy, and $10,000 is still a lot of money. You don't want it to go flying, so having this trigger release system gives you a little bit more security than Patek's system, by the way, platinum clasp. Here we have a friction fit system using a radial spring, and so this snaps together and it's pretty secure, but in theory violent action or inertia could open it up, whereas the Breitling has more security against that sort of an outcome. So let's just recap. Automatic 48-hour power reserve, chronometer, double quick set, hacking seconds, column wheel with an oscillating pinion clutch. And the oscillating pinion clutch does produce very little extraneous movement when you start it up. It's a type of lateral clutch that is super precise, and it's actually endemic to all 7750 architectures, so a bit of an unexpected advantage here. This actually has a clutch that will engage with less extraneous movement than the chronograph on the Patek, which is a traditional lateral clutch that always tends to jump a little bit when you start it up, and it is visibly more abrupt. So what does the Patek offer? Well, we did our wrist shot. We'll do one more just back to back so you can more easily see. That's the wrist shot of the Breitling, and this is the wrist shot of the Patek. They're only 1 millimeter different in diameter. This is 41 millimeters by 12.8 millimeters, almost identical across the wrist, as here we are 49.6 millimeters. The Breitling is 22 millimeters between the lugs. This watch is 21. So from this distance, frankly, it's easy to mistake the two. Taking a quick look at the dial here, the quality across the board is higher. The details are finer. The quality of the applique, again, we're talking black and gold. Same thing for the hands. We have another tachymeter scale. This one calibrated to base 1000. Both of them can be used for gauging the speed of something very, very fast, over a kilometer, for example, or something slower if you're good with mental decimals. Now, I'm actually going to say, if you look here, the apertures for the Patek date aren't quite as neatly executed as the deeper faceted apertures for the Breitling. So that's really the last advantage that the Breitling has. This watch, we may as well talk about the movement, then we'll get to the advantages, but it uses the 29535 Petit Seconde with a perpetual calendar. So 29535 is a Patek manufacture manual wind chronograph caliber. Manual wind with a 65-hour reserve. It does feature hacking seconds. You can see a black polished and capped column wheel with a traditional lateral clutch. 4 Hz beat rate, 6-position adjustment, 33 joules, free sprung Gyromax style balance. It has an overcoil hairspring. which gives it very consistent timekeeping in every physical position. The finish here with Patek Philippe seal is as good or better as the company's previous Geneva hallmark, and you can see beveling on all the steel parts for the chronograph as well as on all the brass parts for the bridges and plates. Black polish in abundant satination across the top of the steel structures. We feature engine turning, stripes, satination, bevels, black polished screws with chamfered slots and circumference, locating pegs for springs and bridges that are polished on their heads, satinated wheels. There is no comparison. In terms of fine finish, this has it all over the Breitling. And of course, it is a perpetual calendar. No need to reset until the year 2100, and the moon phase has an adjustment interval of once every 122 years. So advantages for the Patek Philippe? Well, it's a true perpetual calendar. Hands down, it's the more sophisticated mechanism, and it carries great prestige. In terms of accuracy, well, theoretically, the COSC test means this is no worse than -4 plus 6 seconds per 24 hours. That's a third-party evaluation of the bear movement. Patek will test the entire watch in 6 positions, not 5, and it will verify that this watch is no worse than -3 plus 2 seconds before it leaves the factory. So we've got a greater accuracy tolerance here. We have 6-position adjustment rather than 5. We have an overcoil hairspring shaped by hand for better timekeeping in different positions, and instead of having a Edicron timing system with the Concepto eccentric screw fine regulation mechanism, here we have Patek Philippe's true free-sprung Gyromax adjustment system, which is both more shock tolerant and better for very fine-tuning adjustments. A big advantage, again, in terms of technical refinement across the board, the accuracy, the adjustment, the hairspring, the Gyromax. This is a true handmade watch. The case is hand-finished. The dial is hand-assembled. The movement and all of its many parts, hand-finished, hand-adjusted, and when the time comes, it will go back to master watchmakers who specialize in lateral clutches and overcoil hairsprings, meaning the most senior chronograph watchmakers at Patek Philippe. More junior people work with silicone hairsprings and vertical clutches. This gets the highest level of expertise. This is a much finer watch at every level, from the individual pieces to the total package. Also, an unbroken, unrivaled tradition from 1941 to the present. Patek's series production, and I mean low series production, perpetual calendar chronographs started, well, wristwatch-wise, in 1941 with the 1518, so this is the heir to that legacy. The 1518, the 2499, the 3970, 5970, this watch carries the mantle of an incredible tradition that anyone who's a fan of watches should be aware of, and this is the latest in that line. In terms of power reserve, this is 65 hours, the other one is 48, so advantage Patek. It is thinner by far, 12.8 versus 15.7. This wears a lot more compact on the wrist, even though the size difference in diameter and lug-to-lug is not that different. This is the real deal. There's no question this came first, this came second. That is literally the order that they launched. Breitling's proposition is that for a fraction of the cost of the Patek, you can have something that looks very similar, whereas Patek's proposition is for cost no object, you can have the finest perpetual calendar chronograph that it knows how to build. And again, you're talking new, about $219,760 for the green dial model that's currently in production. This right here is going to be $175 to $180. In terms of water resistance, 30 meters. So this is splash only, whereas on a different strap, this is surprisingly aquatic. You can also see Patek doesn't use quite as dramatically domed a sapphire, but it has a far more sophisticated case design with fluted lugs, stepped lugs, a concave bezel, a lot more detail, finer in almost every regard. There's a little bit of an inward step to the bezel. It's got a flange that abuts the sapphire, and of course that diamond between the lugs, the top Vesselton diamond, your sign that this is a modern-day platinum Patek Philippe. So which would I choose? Well, obviously, cost no object, I choose the Patek Philippe. But if I were to wear one of these every day, and I couldn't have something else, I would at least give some consideration to automatic winding, Lume, and the 100-meter water resistance, all of which distinguish this watch and make it more of an all-arounder, whereas this is more of a dedicated dress watch. Either one of these watches could be your daily, but in terms of how you can wear this one, it's going to give you more options, especially on a different strap. Now, Patek has one final advantage. This is not a big one, but you can see that it has the pull tab spring bars. So you can remove the strap without a tool. So I would ultimately choose the Patek cost no object, but for a number of reasons, including practicality and price, I think the Breitling is the no-brainer. Ideally, if you're the guy who could afford this, you'd also buy this. Switch between them as circumstances dictate, and this could be your daily driver, this could be your fine watch, and people would never know the difference. You could literally swap them out and not get caught, and maybe that is the greatest argument in the Breitling's favor. So you guys, let me know in the comments below, cost as an object, cost no object, which of these would you want, or would you just haggle skillfully on this one and use the money you save to buy this one? Time out, Tim out, and thanks for logging on.